So I'm sitting outside the visitor center here. I want to share some testimonies, some sayings or some quotes from some tribal leaders. Something also that Jesse Bushyhead said. Prior to the removal I'd like to read first with Philippians chapter 1. Beginning in verse 9. This I pray, that your love may abound yet more and more in knowledge and in all judgment, that ye may approve things that are excellent, that ye may be sincere and without offense till the day of Christ, being filled with the fruits of righteousness, which are by Jesus Christ, unto the glory and praise of God. But I would ye should understand, brethren, that the things which happen unto me have fallen out rather unto the furtherance of the gospel. What an amazing testimony to have, that what happens in one's life helps to further the gospel. In 1836, Jesse Bushyhead, who was an interpreter, a Cherokee preacher, an interpreter for Evan Jones. And by the way, Evan Jones was probably one of the greatest Baptist friends that the Cherokee had. He would later be adopted into the tribe when they would arrive into new territory. But also Evan Jones said the greatest enemy that the Cherokee had was a Baptist. Evan Jones was no friend to Isaac McCoy, and he did not speak well of Isaac McCoy, and he figured that Isaac McCoy was probably the worst enemy. So you had a Baptist who was a friend to the Cherokee, and a Baptist who they considered was an enemy. So that's interesting. Jesse Bushyhead said this about these troubles, and this is a quote. These troubles teach us that this world is not our home. These troubles make us look forward to that city which hath foundations, and whose builder and maker is God. These troubles teach us we are but strangers and pilgrims in this world. This is my consolation for my brethren in the Lord. End of quote. The head chief of the Pawnee, who died in 1923, White Eagle came to a saving knowledge of Jesus Christ in 1911, in the winter of 1911. He gave his testimony before his tribe. I am the oldest man in the tribe. You used to see me fighting, killing, and scalping. And now see that to be a chief I must lead in good things and be example to my people. When I heard the book, I saw that I was a sinner and wanted God's forgiveness. I had a strong feeling for my sin, for I had killed and scalped many people and stolen many horses. I want to live and die as a Christian. You have God's word. Learn all you can. White Eagle's children and grandchildren would all hear and receive the gospel and were active members in Methodist and Baptist churches. Lone Wolf, who was the principal chief of the Kiowa, he came to the Jesus Road by a Baptist mission work. In 1892, there was a mission that was started among the Kiowas, named in Lone Wolf's honor, Lone Wolf Mission. Robert Hamilton, who wrote of Lone Wolf, said that he was a great Christian leader. And I share this because north of Anadarko, after the Civil War, some of the participant native leaders from the Seminole, the Creek, and Muskogee, I think, were involved in a mission endeavor to reach the western tribes that were being brought into western Oklahoma near Anadarko, and they would bring in the Waco and the Kiowa, some Comanche, and so forth. And there was other tribes of the western tribes that were brought into western Oklahoma. North of Anadarko, about 5 or 8 miles outside of north of Anadarko, on that, I forget the number of the highway, there's a historical marker, and it talks about how John McIntosh, who was a Creek Indian preacher, preached a sermon there that lasted half a day, using John 3:16 as a text, talking about the love of God through Jesus Christ. And he would begin from the creation story and bring it all the way to Calvary, as he's preached to these thousands of tribes that were gathered, natives that were gathered there, and thousands would come to a saving knowledge of Christ and be saved. And there would be churches that would be started, missions that would be started as a result of that. And I share that because the relocation, the removal, there were some strong Christian leaders among these native tribes. And not only did they give a strong spiritual support during the removal for their people, but when they got to the new territory and after things kind of settled down in eastern Oklahoma, present-day Oklahoma, where the tribes were settling in after the Civil War, after their own little inner battles and so forth, they were involved in mission work of reaching the western tribes that were being brought into western part of Oklahoma. And so I have a few of their testimonies, and I want to find one of the guys that was converted there north of Anadarko during this time was a Delaware native by the name of Black Beaver. He was very popular in the 19th century, and a statue of him is at Anadarko, Oklahoma, American Indian Hall of Fame. He served as interpreter for early mission work in Indian Territory and was instrumental in the establishing of the first known Baptist church among Oklahoma Plains Indians. So there was a tremendous work of the Spirit among the tribes. I want to read this quote here also. American history has been written leaving out the great Christian deeds and achievements of the American Indian, blaming them instead of praising them. History of America without Native Americans is a distorted history. Native people built this country, gave America her first Bible, gave missionaries land for their churches, fought in every war so her white citizens can enjoy their freedom. Native tribes taught the white people survival skills, successful warfare techniques, and weaponry that are still in use today. Tribal policies were influential in this nation's constitution. No other people practiced forgiveness and love for their enemies like Native Americans. This country was and is built upon the blood, backs, and minds of Native Americans. Shame on this country's citizens for being one-sided in their boast of a Christian nation a concept foreign in New Testament, while ignoring the anti-Christian practices toward native tribes. While all tribal forefathers were generous, many white forefathers were covetous for native soil and gold, and like Balaam ran greedily after it, spilling the blood of thousands of innocent native women and children. Today, white citizens encourage native people to forget the past, while at the same time these white citizens remember and celebrate their fight against other lands and nations of tyranny. Only until Americans today become honest in their look at history, then will they learn from it, not to be repeated. And I want to conclude with this quote from Charles Eastman. I have come to the conclusion that this Jesus was an Indian. He was opposed to material acquirement and to great possessions. He was inclined to peace. He was as unpractical as any Indian, and set no price upon his labor of love. These are not the principles upon which the white man has founded his civilization. It is strange that he could not rise to these simple principles which were commonly observed among our native people. My effort was to make the Indian feel that Christianity is not at fault for the white man's sins, but rather the lack of it. And I freely admitted that this nation is not Christian, but Christians in it are trying to make it so. Charles Eastman, Sioux, co-founder of the Boy Scouts of America. And it's interesting because, like George Catlin, who observed a lot of the early tribes, he said that a lot of them were very peaceful, loving, and so forth, and generous and kind. He didn't find the spirit of covetousness among them. And that's interesting because the natives were termed by the settlers as savages and so forth, and yet it was just the complete opposite in many cases.